Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dennis Goosen. I'm a CPA. I specialize in cross-border taxation. Today we're going to dive into a topic that many of my clients have been asking about, and that is being the executor in a Canadian estate while living abroad, particularly if you're living in the United States. Serving as an executor for a Canadian estate can be really complex and demanding. And it's even more complicated if you're living outside of Canada. So let's break this down. There's some key challenges and responsibilities on both sides of the border. So first of all, just basically your role as an executor. This is in Canada. This is, similar to around the world. As an executor, your primary duties include gathering and protecting assets, locating, securing all the assets of the deceased person, paying out all the debts and taxes of that person, and then finally distributing the estate according to what the will stipulates. There are some limitations and complexities in Canada that we need to deal with. So some specific challenges that you might face while handling a Canadian estate from abroad. Number one is residency issues. So Canadian law generally prefers executors to be residents of Canada for ease of administration. If you live abroad, especially if you're living in the US, the court might require you to post bond to act as executor or appoint a resident co-executor. There's also tax obligations. Canadian estates can be subject to various taxes. There's deemed disposition tax on capital gains. So as an executor, you need to file the final tax return of the individual who passed away, ensure that all their taxes are paid. This can be tricky if you are not familiar with Canadian tax law. And then finally, there's just the regular communication and coordination issues. Managing an estate requires constant communication with beneficiaries, lawyers, financial institutions. Living abroad, maybe being in a different time zone, makes things harder to coordinate effectively. So those are just some practical considerations with what it takes to be an executor for a Canadian estate. Now, there are some misconceptions that we need to think about, that we need to clear up. The first one is that a U.S. person cannot be an executor. That's not true. There are additional considerations, but it's definitely allowed. You can be an executor while you're a non-resident of Canada. You can be an executor while you are a resident of the U.S. Then we need to talk about where the tax residency of the estate is. The misconception is that this is always a Canadian estate. By Canadian law and U.S. law, the tax residency of an estate, which is considered a trust under tax law, is determined by where the central management and control of the estate takes place. To keep the tax residency in Canada, what you can do is you can appoint additional Canadian resident executors, which will ensure that the majority of executors are Canadian residents, which will keep that trust as a resident of Canada. So that's something to consider. For example, if you're a single person and you're the executor of a Canadian estate, you could consider appointing 2 more co-executors to reside in Canada. You can still do the majority of the work, but just making sure that those other 2 are involved in decision making. Then just a misconception about not having any reporting issues. Remembering if you're a U.S. resident executor, you're going to have U.S. filing requirements, such as filing the FBAR. If you've got financial accounts now that have balances of more than $10,000 US accumulated between all your foreign bank accounts, those accounts will need to be included on your FBAR reports. That's something that most Canadian U.S. persons or Canadian background U.S. persons are already familiar with. The other thing is that there's bonding issues. So sometimes the court will require a U.S. resident executor to post bond in Canada as security to the court. That's to protect the beneficiaries from negligence or fraud on the executor's part, because the executor is not in Canada. The court can reduce the requirement. They can waive the requirement if all the beneficiaries agree to waive waive it, and they're all adults and they're able to waive the requirement. So that's something to consider. We need to consider our investments, because some Canadian investment advisors aren't allowed to take instructions from U.S. residents. So you may have to have a co-executor in a separate role, like investment trustee, to be able to manage those investments. Okay, on the U.S. side, there's foreign trust reporting issues. So this assumes that the trust is indeed resident in the U.S., or that you as an executor are a signatory on that trust. So the IRS may consider that Canadian estate as a foreign trust, which means that you are going to have to file Forms 3520 and Form 3520A to report distributions from that trust and ownership in that trust. So you are one of the owners of that trust as being one of the executors. Also, if the trust, the trust or the estate continues on for some period of time and there's income in that trust, of course, as a U.S. executor or beneficiary of the trust, you would have to report any income that's received into the estate that's going to be flowing out to you. And then, of course, we talked about FBAR already, so you may have to file FBAR. In fact, if it's a high enough balance, you may have to file Form 8938 as well. So what are some practical tips to help us manage these responsibilities? One of the very first one would be to hire a professional, work together with a Canadian lawyer, work together with a CPA or an accountant who's familiar with Canadian taxes and able to file in Canadian, in the Canadian system. Stay very organized, manage your estate efficiently so you can comply with both Canadian and U.S. requirements and regulations. Make sure you understand all your reporting obligations, and of course, using technology, video calls. It's actually quite feasible now to manage these estates, even if you're farther away. So, in summary, being an executor in a Canadian estate while living in the U.S. is not a small thing to consider, but with the right knowledge and support, you can do it. You can navigate these challenges successfully. It's important to seek professional advice to ensure you're meeting all your legal requirements, all your tax obligations on both sides of the border. If you find this video helpful, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel for more tips on cross-border tax. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments below, and I'll answer them. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.